Well, first of all, a big hello to anyone if they're dialing in from Heriot-Watt and all the people I used to work with in that role. It was really interesting and I learned loads. But to be really honest, in that role, I definitely, well, I hadn't worked with Ktn very much. I did know that they existed and I'd had meetings with, I can see Claudia's put, hi Claudia. I did have some meetings with Ktn members of staff. I also knew that Ktn were facilitating the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund workshops, so I knew they were heavily involved in ISCF, but I couldn't understand the relationship between Ktn, Innovate UK, why were they involved, right? And I didn't really understand it. So when I started at working at Ktn, I think one of the surprises was just how amazing the work was. And I'm not just saying this, I love this job. It's great to be able to say that and really mean it. I mean, the people are amazing, the knowledge. You walk into rooms sometimes and it almost feels, I don't mean intimidating, it's like so exciting when there's so much knowledge in the organisation and there's so much good that we do. We're not good at talking about it. So it's just amazing that people don't know what we do because it's just so valuable, and that is something we're definitely working on. And then before I did my interview, I spoke to a lot of people before I did my interview. So I asked them, what's your view, your frank view on Ktn? And they'd go, oh yeah, I worked with them. I had a chat with Jane or Fred or whatever, and they were really good. It was great, but they couldn't actually tell me what Ktn did as an organisation as a whole. So that is something we're working on very hard, and you'll see the outcomes of that in the next few weeks. In terms of the wider relationship with universities, so we touched on that a bit before. So I'm sure, I hope that people dialing in have heard of KTPs. You'll know that we've just shortlisted some of our KTP awards, you might know that. And the KTPs are a brilliant example. If you meet the people involved in those, it really is inspiring to see universities and small businesses work together like that. And we've got some brilliant examples of, I mean, for example, there's one, I think it's with British Salt and the University of Manchester, this is in our awards, but developing a new brand of salt for health purposes. I mean, it's just brilliant. The KTP program is great, and we also have some really good point-to-point relationships. So it'll be Ktn with an academic or Ktn with someone from one of the KE offices. We do not have a more strategic, coordinated relationship with universities, and that is something that I'd really like to explore more. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. One is, as Ktn, we're connected very strongly across a whole range of businesses, different sizes and everything. And how can we get better visibility of the research that is coming out of the universities and feed that into that business network that we have? And from the other side, how can we help you as universities be able to describe the value or the commercial impact of that research? How can we help that? So I think together there could be real power in enhancing that network we have and that engagement with businesses. So there's definitely opportunity to make that relationship better and more strategic.
It definitely feels to me that the Ktn hasn't yet been able to really articulate the how it wants to work with universities, and really, I mean, in our job, it's all about getting things to the next stage, isn't it? You've got to make a connection in order to do something, in order to move to the next stage. And I think on paper it looks as if the Ktn should be the first port of call for people in universities to move something to the next stage, whatever that is. If it's identifying a partner, or just understanding a sector a bit better, or thinking about a commercial route, you know, that it ought to be the first call. But generally, it's probably it's probably the third or fourth call. And so how do you think how could we get it so that those 200 people in the Ktn feel like they're part of our teams? And then, you know, because if you take the knowledge exchange community in the UK, it's about 5,000 people who are, you know, members of PraxisAuril, and and it feels like they're not necessarily connecting into those 200 really talented people that you've got.
Yeah, so well, there's two elements to that. Well, one is let's do a joint event. We should probably be doing more joint work together for a start between Ktn and PraxisAuril. And I have had a chat, Maxine, in induction, we did talk about that, but I think one of the elements that's missing in this discussion that's important is that relationship with UKRI. So what we want to be doing is making sure that those engagements and those connections are really fluid and holistic. I don't know. So I feel like the relationship with UKRI is a really important component of what you've just described. Because what we don't want to be doing, I feel very strongly with KTN, we do not want to be repeating work that other organisations are doing or competing. What we want to be doing is adding value to the system and connecting where those connections don't exist, enhancing those. So I think working with UKRI, which as I said we do, but it's a bit ad hoc, I think this is one element we need to be talking to them about. I've got a meeting with Ottoline, the new CEO of UKRI, coming up, and that's certainly something we could talk about. And I think the relationship with PraxisAuril as well, I mean, it's really complementary, I think, the work that you do and your members do and the people on this call and the work that we do. So I think there's lots of opportunity.
Yeah, and I think there is, you know, there aren't enough of us that we could, you know, afford to be doing things on our own. So, you know, and we need as much skill and knowledge as we can gain. It was interesting that the first of our SHEDTalks was with Tony Soterio from UKRI. He's taken on that commercialization brief in UKRI, and you know, they are key to making things happen, I think, and driving things down through universities. So the more we can make that happen, the better. Just wanted to come to one of the questions from, which has now moved to the bottom of my list now, from Claudia right at the beginning, talking about your first 100 days. And it's sort of, we sort of covered a bit of that with, you know, what surprised you most. But you just about had the luxury of you know, getting to know the organisation before we all got locked down, didn't you? So can you describe the difference between that first period when you started, you know, in the heady days of August and September, and compare them with the moment when we all had to go and work from our bedrooms and sheds?
So I think I was really lucky in the first 100 days. What I did before I started the job is I invested so much time before starting to try and understand other people's view of KTN. So I did a lot of pre-work before starting the job. And in the job, one of the things I was really worried about starting at KTN was we have people distributed throughout the UK, and how could I connect into those people? That's really hard. You know, when you're used to having people in an office, right? Which nearly all the jobs I'd had, there would be some sort of office where everyone was together. You could have a meeting or something or an event. Whereas KTN, we've got 3 offices, but there are more touchdown points, like you might meet 10 or 20 of the people. So that was a real worry really for me. So I focused a lot on trying to meet, I did meet face to face the teams very, very early on and talk to them about really fundamental questions really openly, like the questions you're asking me. What is the purpose? What are you doing? What difference are you making? All of those questions, right? So we got all of that out very early. And also I knew that we had to do a lot of work on the purpose, the direction of KTN, exactly the type of questions you're asking me. So we kicked that work off really early. So very early, I hadn't planned this. We decided to do a questionnaire to everyone, asking them what is the purpose of KTN, and we built on that work very quickly with the board. And I actually didn't know that KTN didn't have a strategy for the whole company. We had a strategy for the work we do with Innovate, and we had like a plan thing, but we didn't have a company strategy on where we want to be. So we started work on that almost straight away. What a great way to get people engaged. It was good. And so the impact of COVID, I mean, I can talk about the impact on COVID if that's interesting because that was massive, as it has been for everyone, but also amazing. So it was a really challenging, sad, difficult time for many, many, many people, right? And terrible in lots of ways. But for there was also, and I don't mean this in a crude way at all, but so much opportunity, so much change, so much new thinking that really fueled things that we were going to do about. I already wanted us to work at faster pace, to do things online, to encourage business to collaborate even more. All of those things were really, really pushed forward by COVID. So it I don't know if you want me to talk about our COVID response, but we did focus. Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, since we're on the topic.
Yeah, so we did. I don't know if this will be useful for people, but for us, the absolute critical number one thing was not responding to all the mad requests. It was our staff. So the number one thing we did was set up a wellbeing team. We made sure everyone had the right IT within about 2 days. We'd already done a test of people working at home. We've done loads on wellbeing. We've got wellbeing. We have open forums weekly. I have a weekly meeting with all the line managers to make sure they're well supported. We have really fun things like storytelling for our Ktn children, Zumba classes, meditation, all sorts of things, to make people really feel they are supported and that they have the right tools or support or whatever in the organisation. That has been, I cannot emphasise how important that's been. And then from a work side, well, that is work, but from a more technical side, I mean, as you probably we were having phone calls like at the weekends, like Ian Campbell would be going, we need to sort out like PP or supply chain. So we were working on the ventilator work with Formula One, we were doing PP supply chains, we were working on renal fluid. That was really intense. We were having exec meetings. I remember one day on a Sunday, we had 3 exec meetings on a Sunday to respond. We were also providing reviewers for the big calls that were coming out. It was just very intense those first few weeks. But what we wanted to do is make sure we weren't just reacting. So we set up some teams that were working on longer term questions, like, I've just come out of a meeting before this around supply chains. How do we get food to our tables? How are we picking fruit when people are getting ill when they're doing it and we can't fly people over from Eastern Europe to do it? So we're looking at that. We're looking at logistics of supply chains, mental health. So those longer term issues. And then the really long-term issues like rebuilding the economy, the net zero, green growth, all of those things, we will be picking those up. We are picking those up in our strategy workshops, which we've just set up. Can I give you a wee example that I really like? So I really like this example because it might be different from what people think about Ktn. So we're working with an organisation, you might have not heard of it, it's called FareShare. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's UK's largest charity, and what they do is they want to fight hunger and the challenge of food waste, right? So with COVID, there were massive challenges on redistributing food, and they wanted to redistribute food to the homeless or refugees or children's breakfast clubs. So we've been working with FareShare, this charity, and what we've been doing is connecting industrial mathematicians to do like modelling and all the things that great industrial mathematicians do. And the things we've been looking at, for example, are the demand. So where is the demand, where is the demand for surplus food? And also, how do you incentivize those producers making sure that surplus food goes to the right place? So what an exciting project. We're doing loads of exciting things like that. And we need to get better at talking about them.
Yeah, and I think we've all had those extraordinary opportunities, haven't we, in this period, and people have really had a chance to kind of shine, I think, in this period. So I'd like to move on a bit. So there's a question from Orla Kelly from Dundee about regional engagement, and it was a strand that we were going to explore in this session. So I'll just expand on that. So just talk to us about what role geography plays, for the KTN. It's becoming more important. We've seen the R&D roadmap, which talks about the real focus on levelling up and moving outside the Golden Triangle for innovation activity. how do you see KTN working in the regions, and also, I suppose, with, as Orla mentions, with the devolved funding bodies and indeed the devolved governments in different parts of the UK?
So I think we all realise that place and levelling up is extremely high, as you've said, on government agendas, and has been for a number of months, potentially years. So the challenge, I think, is it's not getting people to agree it's important, it's how we make it work. And for KTN, as I've said, we've got staff right across the UK, and the areas that we want to focus on, and it's in our strategy, as I said, local engagement is in our strategy. It's about connecting the local ecosystem, because sometimes we do have competing activities going on locally, which is not a good thing. So connecting locally and how we can help do that, and that's different in every place around the UK. And also connecting local activities with a national picture. So where there's national opportunities, how do we ensure that we position local groups and local regional activity with those national opportunities? And then if you turn that on its head, is being able to better inform that national picture with our local knowledge. In terms of who was the question from? Is it Olga? Orla, sorry, Orla from Dundee. Yeah. So as you can imagine, for me, just personally, that's a really relevant question. I personally do a lot of work for SFC, and the position of the devolved administrations within the wider national narrative is absolutely critical. So we feel that's extremely important, and it worries me a little bit from a personal perspective at how unjoined up that is. And I was just listening to the news this morning about the discussions about decision making within the devolved administrations vis the national government. We really do have a role to try and join that up. All of us have that role. It's really, really important, and in the best way we can. So yeah, we do get involved with the national, so with Research England, Scottish Funding Council and the equivalents in Wales and Northern Ireland heavily, and that's something we want to do even more of. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, well, I think it's clearly going to be, you know, an exciting new focus for all of our activity, creating innovation ecosystems in regions, and then making sure those are connected up to national organisations and national level organisations, and beyond, I suppose. Is there? I mean, it feels a bit as if it might be just government might just be paying lip service to regional activity and actually intend to control everything centrally, but put a regional sticker on it. Is there a role that KTN can play for us in lobbying for the value, or persuading governments of the value of working locally and connecting nationally, and you know, making the most of those ecosystems that we've all been busy building up?
So I wouldn't be able to use the word lobby, but I think the word inform or influence or something we could definitely do. I mean, yeah, I think we all of us have a role to play in that. And I'm just looking at Orla's question about, do we take a national approach or a regional approach? We do both of those. And KTN, we're lucky, we have a luxury of having the insight of what national bodies are doing. So we're spending a lot of time as funders knowing what they're doing and prepping for that. So having that regional and national link is really critical. I agree with you. I do think sometimes, for example, when you look at documents, particularly when things are moving very quickly, you often get, it's almost a PS and the devolved administrations just added at the end. It's like someone's gone through it. And I think this is going to be a big challenge going forward, particularly with COVID, when we all had different approaches across the UK. I think it's almost reinforced some of those boundaries. What I would say is collaboration. So across universities, this is a plea, right? Because I sit in these committees where everyone's moaning about funding decreasing and all the terrible things, and how it's terrible for so many people. What we need to be doing is working together. We absolutely have to be working together. This is a time when we have to put the case collectively. And certainly KTN, we want to and are involved in that, but it's a bit of a plea for all of us. This is a really key time where we need to work together on that, if we want to call it lobbying, or on that messaging. Yeah,
I think we're hearing that in a very consistent way across all of these SHEDTalk discussions, certainly. I suppose the question is, universities have been spending a lot of time building up these. There's been nobody else really to build up these regional networks and ecosystems of key players, but they're often not connected to national organisations, and it does feel as if there could be a role for the KTN there in taking things from the regional to the national in a very explicit way, if we could. I wanted to come back to a question that I think it was early on from Simona Foscarin. Can't read the rest of the name on the way it's come through. Talking about Foscarin Cosmetatu, Simona, about someone you know, I think, about this question about briefing stakeholders before the meeting. And I just wonder, that's a kind of familiar feeling for all of us, having to kind of manage our stakeholders beforehand. Just your reflections on that at government level. Are you doing that at government level to try and persuade people to do things?
Do you mean briefing our own staff or briefing our government people?
It was about stakeholders, I think, was the question, and the real point was about this seems to be more important in academia, because you have to kind of lay the ground, don't you, for making a case. But I think it's the case all round, isn't it?
So I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, but the culture of briefing, as I said, it's something I really picked up when I was working in an embassy, and some civil servants, and people have different views on civil servants, but the embassies, they were absolutely amazing at making sure that you went into a meeting, you knew what the purpose was about, you knew the drivers of those individuals, what the need was, and you had all that information on a couple of pages, right? And I don't think, we certainly don't in universities have that culture generally. And especially with academics. So I've got a challenge in KTN that's similar to what you have in universities, in that we've got these people with brilliant minds who are very autonomous and brilliant, right? So our staff are all super good and they know loads, right? So what you don't want to be doing is dampening that down and giving them some hideous script that makes them feel like they've turned into something they're not. So I think what we're trying to do is get the culture, is making people feel part of a wider message. And this is the same as academics, but you have to allow that freedom as well. Not allow that freedom. Those people have their own expertise and knowledge that they want to articulate. And it's quite challenging to get that balance. It's different from when you're in an embassy, when people are used to delivering for a minister. But I do think that culture of understanding the purpose, we are going to get more and more engagement with politically, right? So we all have to engage more and more as universities with ministers, with high level business contacts, and getting in that mindset. You know yourself, there are people that go into those meetings and they're great at being able to get the outcome they want because they thought about how they're going to deliver it. I don't think that's a natural for many people when they go into a job. It's not a natural or comfortable way of working. But we definitely, if we're working with government and working with senior business people, you have to be doing that. We need to be doing that. Yeah. All of us, I think.
It's a much more sophisticated approach that's needed, isn't it? We talked regional a moment ago and trying to grow things regionally. But it is a global business, isn't it? This business we're in. So do you see KTN as having an international reach, an international arm? Will you be resetting, setting up your Beijing office, your Delhi office any moment soon?
So firstly, I'm super excited about the opportunities of international for KTN. When I first started the job, I purposely didn't go on about this because I've done so much international work in the past, so I didn't want to bring it in if it wasn't a big opportunity. As you've said, innovation is global. Businesses, companies need global connections, as academics do, and collaboration around the world, especially with Brexit, is, I mean, it's not just good, it's necessary and important. So we already currently do a whole load of work around international. So we run global expert missions. I don't know if you've heard of them, but basically bringing together the expertise of researchers and business to identify potential partnerships with our overseas counterparts. We're building a whole range of relationships across Europe. And the most recent project that's really interesting is actually in collaboration with DFID. It's big, it's about a £10 million initiative where we're going to develop 3 teams across Africa and Kenya, Nigeria and South Africa to build their innovation systems and build the partnership with the UK. That obviously is slightly veered into a COVID space because of COVID, but that we will be setting up, I don't know what we'll call it, but we will have teams in Kenya, Nigeria and South Africa. And as part of that, what we've set up is something called the Ktn Global Alliance. We haven't formally launched that, which will encompass all our global work. And it's about building a network of international partners. But for me, what was really interesting coming into KTN with a recent background of working with official development assistance, so like ODA aid money on things like Newton and working in India and things, I was really surprised to see how much interest there was from like DFID and the Department for International Development and the Foreign Office, the FCO, in the type of work that we were doing. So it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves, and especially with the merger of the Foreign Office with the Department for International Development. Mm-hmm. I just want to really reinforce to everyone listening is that we do not want to be competing or repeating the work of organisations that already exist. So we have, for example, the Science and Innovation Network that's doing brilliant work overseas. What we're doing is partnering with them.
Yeah, and they are great, and it would be really good for for there to be a more structural connection with the Science and Innovation Network too. I think because they are really useful people. Just looking at the R&D roadmap that came out the other day, very wide-ranging document, I suppose, but it puts a really strong emphasis on innovation as a key driver, and it also talks a lot about the sorts of things you've been saying, the connected ecosystem. Everybody working together effectively, the research base, universities, businesses, funders, private capital, all of that working together. And at the same time, they announced the establishment of ARPA, which seems to sit outside of all of that. It feels like there's some contradictions in this strategy. How do you see that playing out from where you sit?
So I think the first thing to say is, as everyone, we obviously welcome the fact that there's more money and public investment in R&D. Like, the emphasis is brilliant. To see that even be published at this time is great. And also, we are pushing this message, all of us, that we know that innovation is really critical to that economic recovery, and especially that building back better, the government agenda of building back a better society around net zero, for example. So it's good. I mean, my view, we get all these initiatives all the time, don't we? Like every few years you get some initiative. I think my view is that it's likely that ARPA will be connected with the innovation ecosystem. So it's not necessarily a contradiction. I mean, we know there are really good reasons for having these long-term funded projects and some big challenges for really great researchers. Because we know, like, that government spending cycle with different funding and everyone chasing the money is not a good way to work sometimes. But from the US version, the DARPA model, we don't always know what innovations are going to emerge from this long-term research. So I think the key for us is to make sure that that research is making a real positive difference, that it's getting used, it's being applied and making a difference. So I think we can make ARPA work. It's probably just a different framework for how we prioritise. But I just want to pick up, you in that said almost why do you think that's happening? I don't know if I can answer that necessarily or that I'd want to on this call, but one point to make is that there is definitely a closeness between number 10 and UKRI, for example, that we have not seen before. So in the past, the arm's length nature of government and research and innovation funding has been really, really important. So I think my own personal, this is a personal view, this is not a KTN view, is that relationship between government and funders. We need to make sure that there's a distance between those two, or we run into a very difficult place, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and that's a bigger message. It could be ARPA, it could be anything that we're introducing.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we're coming, remarkably, we're coming to near the end of our session. I wanted to have a moment or two to talk about the sort of leadership and personal challenges in your situation. But before I did that, I wanted to ask you the question that no one would be happy for me to finish this session without having asked, which is, are there any secret new new opportunities that are going to emerge in the next few weeks we should be looking out for? Have you got any hints for us about new things that are going to come out from your area?
So I could give you I'll give you some messages and maybe some examples. So I think the main messages you should expect from me, but this is the time for universities to be working with business. You're going to have to be working well with business to succeed, I think, in the current environment, and to increase reputation, for example, with KEF. You will have seen, I'm sure you will have seen this, that we've had 750 million pounds of new money going into Innovate, some of that going to existing projects. But then we've got this new Sustainable Innovation Fund of 191 million. So currently there are 2 Sustainable Innovation Funding calls that are at the moment. They're all focused around either the consequences of the recovery in relation to COVID and also green growth, so sustainable growth. And I think we're very likely to see more of these over the next 6 months. So that focus on recovery and green growth is going to be really important. The new Innovate UK strategy, which has not, they're just doing workshops at the moment, net zero will be absolutely at the top. It's going to be really, really important, and the same for UKRI. I mean, across the board. So in terms of those 2 calls, on the temporary framework one, it's such a rubbish name, but anyway, is the bigger one where we're in round 1 at the moment. So there'll be 2 more rounds of that. And then on the SBRI call, there's going to be 2 phases of that, and the second one's going to be the big money up to 3 million per bid. I just wanted to say, even though those are focused on business leads, universities can be involved. But maybe in different ways, for example, through subcontracting. So please do look at how you can get involved in those. In terms of the themes that are going to come out, I've already talked about net zero. That is absolutely at the top. If you speak to anyone in UKRI, net zero is going to be massive, right? The other one, strength in places. So things are being held up a lot in government just because of all the change going on. So there will be strength in places opportunities coming out. And then the other area, which was in the roadmap, that I'm sure you've picked up if you've read the roadmap, is around talent. So I'd strongly recommend, if you haven't had him come to speak with you already, I'd get Rory Duncan to come and speak to you. He's the new director of talent and skills. And that's going to focus on a whole number of initiatives, but a really interesting angle of that is around technical staff, so the support of technical staff. So that's quite different from what we've seen before. So keep your eyes open on that. And then other themes are, you'll know that Ottiline Lizer has come in as the new CEO of UKRI. So there'll be a strong push, this is my view, that because UKRI was obviously created, but we still have these competing councils working basically. basically. So Tony Soterio will have talked about this. So the bringing together, his job is about bringing together all that commercialization funding, right? So like impact acceleration accounts, there's gonna be a lot more push on bringing together the work across UKRI. So the things I think about if I was one of the people dialing in on your calls is, how are you structuring your teams at the moment? So do you have people focused on individual research councils, for example? How are you structuring your relationship between fundamental research or research in its widest sense and then the KE agenda or the enterprise agenda? Because they need to join up in some way. There's going to be more and more emphasis on that joined up activity.
Okay, that's really helpful, Alicia. We're at the end of our time now, unfortunately. So I think we are going to have to close and let people go about their business. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your insight. You started off by talking about bravery and amazing people and working together. And I think you've really inspired us to want to have a closer connection with the KTN and really make things happen. So thank you very much indeed for your talk today. Thank you everyone for listening. You can look at the chat, Alicia, if you wanted to respond to anyone individually there, that would be great, I'm sure, but it's been great having you in the SHEDTalk today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.